Okay, let's talk about Echo. Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to Psycho Bible, about psychology and theology. And if you've been watching my channel long enough, you know that I am also a big comic book guy, and so I have been watching the different shows that Disney Plus has been putting out for Marvel. Most of them I've been disappointed in, but I figured let's do a little commentary on the most recent series they did, five-part Echo. And I really think that this serves as a good example of basically propaganda, like postmodern feminist propaganda. So let's get into it. Now, real quick, I avoided the reviews when this show just came out. I knew there was going to be a lot of criticism just because there's sort of a reactionary right, or at least there's a whole anti-woke movement that as soon as they see anything that has any hints of being woke, or just at this point, if Disney does anything, they criticize it for being woke. And so it can be kind of knee-jerk or just uh, a reaction not based on the evidence yet. So I wanted to wait, let me watch it myself, and form my own opinion first. There's some things I did like. I was really happy to see Daredevil and see him kicking butt, even though it was pretty much just like a flashback, but it was still cool to see him. So that fight scene was pretty good. I think she gave him a little more run for his money than they should have given her, but fine. And of course, I was happy to see Vincent D'Onofrio back as Kingpin. I'm one of the few people who actually enjoyed the miniseries Hawkeye, uh, but I think they really wrote themselves into a corner by having her shoot Kingpin in the face at the end of that show. Now, they didn't show her shoot him, it was an off screen shot, so you could have done that differently, where he actually leapt at her and took the gun, and you just hear the gunshot go off. So, it doesn't mean that he had to have gotten hit. But here in Echo, she clearly shot him in the eye, and the man's alive? Um, alright, whatever. I mean, she should not be the one who actually takes out Kingpin. So I'm glad he didn't die. But the fact that he just sort of recovers from that fairly easily, it's a bit lame. You gotta sort of suspend disbelief there. Some of the fight scenes were good, except some things were pretty unbelievable, especially with the idea that she can kick full force with a prosthetic leg. It's not like that thing is bolted to her stub, so I just, sorry, it's just not realistic enough for me when it comes to fighting, and of course follows the typical trope of a woman. She's kind of big for a female, but still, she's still taking on guys that are 250 pounds probably, and not breaking a sweat. So I don't think she got hurt as much as she should have from all that, and whatever. I wish I could say that the only things I groaned over were the fighting. But as I'm watching it, of course, with a critical eye, to just. But even so, I'm trying not to be too critical. They just keep smacking you in the face with some of the most pervasive tropes of wokeism and feminism. The matriarchy. When he does these sort of flashbacks or these sort of moments where they look back at the history of her people, of her tribe, the Choctaw. It's riddled with matriarchy. This idea that it was females that brought this tribe up from the ground, and throughout the history, it was females that won in sports, that were expert sharpshooters, that saved men who were in danger. It was just, come on, it was so heavy-handed, so on the nose. And of course, this also led up to a lot of ancestor worship clearly coming up. We're going to get into that more as we go on. The morality was very subjective. We're going to get into that. There were clear honor-shame dynamics going on. Intersectionality. And what won the day? Empathy. Like, literally, she beat Kingpin through empathy. And Yeah, it was pretty lame. I know a lot of people hated that ending, and well, since they pretty much wrote themselves into a corner, what else were they going to do? She's not going to defeat him physically or kill him, so there really wasn't much other options they could do. So all these things combined, you see that this really is a perfect case study in feminist propaganda in our media, in movies, television, especially stuff that's targeted to younger audiences, to those who are into action movies that typically wouldn't be that interested in feminist propaganda, and of course to girls. They're thinking that, oh, girls gonna want to watch this. I don't really know, but this is clearly Marvel's and Disney's agenda is to. They said this several years ago. If you listen to podcasts or articles written by the executives at Marvel Comics, is to change Marvel from like a comics brand that focuses on superheroes to a lifestyle brand. They're trying to get out of the fact that comic books are really a boys and pretty much now middle-aged men medium. Like it or not, this whole industry has been built on the backs of men. It appeals to the male fantasy of being a hero, of seeing girls that have idealized bodies, and guys will read comics with female heroes. Wonder Woman's had a long-standing career not because of female readership, but from men reading her comics. Uh, Other female characters over time, usually in a group or team setting. But ultimately, comics are for boys. And now you've got all these movies and television shows based off comic book characters, but Disney's trying to figure out a way to make it more appealing to girls. Since what they're going to do, they're going to make it less actually comic book based, and they're going to pretty much discard the continuity that made this whole franchise a success to begin with. Just the fact they're making a show for Echo, a character who never had a miniseries, let alone an ongoing series, who is just a side character in Daredevil, and then became an Avenger when they were kind of this rogue team that was on the run. And she, she doesn't have much to her history. She's on the newer side. And so here we are. We're finally getting movies and TV shows based off comic book characters, and they got all this catalog of heroes that they could use, characters with more of a cult following, and of course they're going to choose her. Why? Because she fits certain boxes. She gets to jump ahead of the line, ahead of other characters I've been dying to see get a series or a movie, such as like the New Warriors, or I mean, I was waiting for a long time for Moon Knight, but to me they botched that series. Uh, yeah. But anyway, all these other characters that have more of a following, that should be more worthy of getting a series or a movie, and they give it to her. Clearly, there's agenda written all over this thing from the get-go. So let's talk about that agenda just briefly. Abigail Favale does a great job in her book, The Genesis of Gender, outlining the different waves of feminism. And so let's just do a little survey of this. These different waves of feminism throughout at least Western history led to the formation of what we could call a secular gender paradigm. Now this started with the first wave, which was the fight for women's suffrage in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, getting to the point where women can now vote and have property rights and such. And this really wasn't really like the feminism that we know today. It was mostly led by pretty conservative women. In fact, when the idea of abortion came up, these sorts of feminists thought abortion was actually anti-woman. It was a violence to her body. So this first wave is very different from what came later. So we have like a 30-year gap from that first wave of feminism, And then you have this second wave that emerged as a revolution to overthrow traditional gender roles and push for things like abortion and birth control as necessary avenues of liberation from the oppressive patriarchy that permeated all of society. Then you have the third wave of the 1990s, which emphasized sexual license and efforts to dissociate sex from emotional intimacy and commitment. In other words, marriage. So that you shouldn't have to be married in order to express yourself sexually. Sex should just be something you can engage in freely and with whomever you want. And to make that more possible, we need things like birth control and chemical birth control, the pill. We need abortion on demand. So whereas the second wave separated sex from reproduction, the third wave separated sex from marriage, and ultimately any true relationship. And now we're in the current fourth wave, which is a full marriage of sorts of feminism with postmodernism and Marxism. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth here. And this is what solidified the secular gender paradigm. Now the effort is to completely separate embodied sex from this idea of gender, what is now being defined as purely performative or merely cognitive and individualistic. Okay. So there are certain key figures that contributed heavily to this secular redefinition of gender. You have the French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir. As early as 1949, so way before even the second wave of feminism, she described the plight of women being socialized to become an object or a slave. Her ideas inspired American Betty Friedan, who sparked the second wave of feminism. So years later, after Simone de Beauvoir wrote her works and her ideas, it inspired Betty Friedan. And they took an existentialist approach to being a woman. That a woman isn't so much what you are biologically, but that it's a role that you put on. And so it's a social construction rather than an actual essence. And the social construct of being a woman is actually oppressive because it was defined for women by the patriarchy, an oppressive patriarchal system. So for de Beauvoir, a woman must take action to transcend both societal oppression and the facticity of her physical state or biology, meaning her reproductive capacity, her vulnerability to get pregnant and then be obligated to care for her children. So she has to take action to gain mastery or control or liberation from the fact of her body and the fact that women are the more vulnerable of the two sexes in that they can get pregnant and then they're kind of incapacitated in some ways because of pregnancy and child rearing. The ideal for de Beauvoir was for women to become as much like men as possible. So it wasn't to actually uplift women and provide for their, where they're vulnerable, to provide for more safety measures and more protections. Rather, it was for women to actually dissociate from their femaleness, the reality of their bodies, and to try to become more like men. Maleness was always presented as the ideal. Now, this has kind of become the trope that we see so much in these action movies where there's a female lead. And she's essentially being portrayed as a man with breasts. She can beat up men twice her size. She doesn't show any sort of feminine personality traits. I mean, look at this with Echo. I mean, this Alakwa Cox, basically she's got like one facial expression the whole time. And this is basically what you saw as well in the Brie Larson Captain Marvel, where it's actually addressed quite plainly when she was criticized by a character on a motorcycle, smile. Like as if anyone actually says that to him these days. But she's basically got a grimace on her face the whole movie. And in Echo, Alakwa Cox has a very similar facial expression the whole movie, whole series. Just this sort of either facial expression of disinterest or just a scowl of some sort. Now, I get she's dealing with some difficult things, but it's ironic because she's deaf. And from what I know of ESL, or ASL, American Sign Language, it's that as you're doing signing, you're supposed to really exaggerate your facial expressions to go along with the signs that you're doing. And you don't really see that much from her. It's just the same, I can't sign, but it's the same face. And so it's very masculine. You have masculinity, unfortunately, is characterized by stoicism and just being tough. And if you express any emotion, it's anger. And that's really an unfortunate stereotype of masculinity, not authentic masculinity, not comprehensive masculinity, but it's this uh, reductionistic stereotype that gets promoted as what it means to be a man and therefore what women should strive to be like themselves. This is what de Beauvoir, pretty much the mother of modern feminism, espoused. And then feminism became even more postmodern in the 1990s under Judith Butler. Her mission has been to further deconstruct the norms surrounding the gender binary. Women are nurturers, men are protectors and providers. No, that's a norm. We need to deconstruct that. But not just with those sort of societal norms, but even our body. And this paves the way to the modern transgender movement. The notion of truth is viewed with suspicion. It's treated as a fiction devised and enforced by institutional power. Ultimately, for Butler, gender is purely an unconscious, socially compelled performance. Make note of that. Gender, to Butler, is performative. This is still a derivative of de Beauvoir. But you see here, this is the rationale for drag queens and drag queen story arts to indoctrinate children to this idea that gender is just simply something you perform. And so you can perform at any of the genders. And so there is no real true gender or even sex. This performative nature of it creates only the illusion of an essence. So the postmodern feminist goal is to transgress and subvert gender and sexual norms in order to overthrow cis heteronormativity. But just in general, what they consider the patriarchy needs to be overthrown. So any norm, it's assumed that that norm exists because of the patriarchy and therefore it's oppressive. There's not a lot of discernment about, well, some of these norms are actually beneficial for us and they're mutually beneficial for men and women, and maybe they've been co-constructed by both men and women over time. And maybe we should think more before we destroy them. No, the postmodern feminist movement is about deconstructing all norms. And so this brings us to applied Marxism, or also called critical theory, which has an instrumental role in our contemporary gender paradigm, specifically through the branch called queer theory. But you got gender theory, you got queer theory, you've got race theory. Marxism has this doctrine of the hegemony of normalcy that is the culprit for all oppression. So it promotes this idea that we're all in some sort of binary relationship as either an oppressor or an oppressed person or a privileged person or a disadvantaged person, a marginalized person. And so there needs to be some sort of revolution where the roles are flipped. We'll get into that a little more in a bit. So there's a survey, or a very brief survey, of the different waves of feminism and how we got where we're at when it comes to the current day ideas of feminism and female empowerment. But to see how this is reflected in Echo as a good case study, a good template for this theme we're seeing, I'm going to defer to RJ from the YouTube channel The Fourth Age. I'm a big fan of his channel. He's a Western philosophy teacher who's also a comic book and pop culture analyst. And he's now a creator of his own comic books to promote the traditional Western ideas of hero. And so he does an apt job of showing how Echo is being used as a model for a postmodern feminist redefinition of hero. So I'm just going to play a pretty long clip from his video on this topic. It starts with talking about Bob Iger, the head of Disney, and how their mission is to promote DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I prefer DIE because I wish this whole thing would just die already. And that their objective, all the Marvel movies and shows going forward, is to make them as diverse and inclusive as possible. And so here's a good case study with Echo. And so let's get into it.
But what I'm going to do is read you a short article that just came out last week from Marvel.com to go over this exact thing. It is titled Echo, Maya Lopez's Hero, and in brackets, and Villain Journey. And then they give a quote saying, the goal was never to turn her from a villain to a hero. The goal was never to turn her into Captain America. The article proceeds as follows. And by the way, Maya Lopez is the character of Echo. It says, is Maya Lopez a villain? It's a little bit more complicated than a yes or no answer, especially considering the events of Marvel Studios' Echo. Yes, Maya does do bad things, like really, really bad things over the course of the season. But does she also help save her friends and family when they need her the most? Also, yes, the creative team behind the show is more than willing to debate at length Maya's decision to operate in the gray area. Considering the previous events of Hawkeye, where viewers first met Maya, she starts off the series largely known as a foe. And along with Maya's growing body count in Echo, director and executive producer Sidney Freeland tells Marvel.com, quote, the goal was never to turn her from a villain to a hero. The goal was never to turn her into Captain America. Instead, Maya has her eyes on a different prize, replacing Kingpin, who she believes is dead. A queenpin, if you will. At the start of the season, Maya has one goal and is willing to do whatever it takes to obtain it, to assert her dominance over her former father figure's empire. Executive producer Brand Wilderbaum explains Maya is an incredible character because she balances good and evil. She's not what you think of as a classic Marvel Silver Age hero. She lives in a morally gray area. Over the course of 5 episodes, viewers start to learn a little more about what makes Maya tick and see her weigh out the good, the bad, and the very bad options. Knowing in hindsight what it took Maya to even get her in the first place, I think that's a typo and they meant to say to even get here in the first place, viewers quickly learn that, as Wilderbaum explains, some of it is not her fault. Certainly, Kingpin's influence was not good for her growing up, her father's influence in many ways, but even her father, who was a criminal himself, loved his daughter, wanted the best for her. There's no simple right or wrong in this season. Even Kingpin has love in his own way for Maya. Even by the end of all 5 episodes, everything is still in the gray territory. Wilderbaum adds, what the show does an amazing job of doing is giving you empathy for this woman and her journey, and really puts you in her shoes, so that you have to ask yourself what decisions you would make and whether or not you would make the same decisions she did along her journey. She is a killer. She has made massive mistakes, and I think it's fun to debate whether she is redeemable in some way. The article continues, Freeland was really striving to create a sense of balance within Maya, where she herself and viewers could weigh her choices together. She explains, it isn't about taking a character from one extreme to another. It's about taking a character and creating a sense of balance within them. By the way, remember, sense of balance of good and evil, as they said up above. She continues, if you look at the course of this series, there's one thing at stake here, which is that for Maya to truly get her goal at the beginning of the season, she would have to sacrifice her humanity. She's presented with this choice to give that up or preserve that. She does. She chooses the latter. I think That's one of the great things, that we get to say so much in such a small amount of time. Then they quote the star Aquila Cox as she says, "She's honestly such a complicated person. I have to remember that she's not a bad person because she grew up with a lot of trauma, because her adopted uncle murdered her father and she had to find that out herself, which just made everything worse. She feels all that rage and revenge. She wants to kill people." The article continues, but by episode 5, Maya can identify what kind of person she wants to be. Episode 5, by the way, is the last episode. They continue, even if for right now that does mean stepping into a new space. Cox adds, she's able to solve that rage and reconnect with her biological family and become peaceful and then become a hero. The article continues, however, there's still a long way for Maya to go on this journey, and there might still be questionable choices for her in the future. Executive producer Richie Palmer muses, I actually don't know it's even about redemption for Maya yet. By the end of the show, I'm not sure where she lies. I think she's just happy to go home for Sunday dinner with her family and that everyone survived the journey. I do think she's pretty bad for most of the show. She's fighting that good. Her family, Bonnie especially, they're like, Maya, don't be like this. Don't be like your dad was. Don't do this. And I don't think she hears them until the very end. Okay, so this is a long video, so I'm going to break this down with speed. This entire article is about the redefinition of what you consider a hero. The traditional idea of a hero in Western civilization for the last 3 millennia minimum is that a hero is a paragon of virtue. Those virtues are very specific in number and are accessed in a very specific way. They are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, and they are successive. In order to have temperance, first you must have fortitude. In order to have fortitude, first you must have justice. In order to have justice, first you must have prudence. But in order to have prudence, you must have something which precedes the entire thing, and that is right reason. That is to say, your reason in accord with reality. So you readjust your mind, first of all, so that you accept reality as it is. That helps you lead into prudence, which is to say, to make correct decisions based upon what is real. That helps you become just, that is to say, to use those good decision-making qualities and the acceptance of reality to render to everyone what is their due. That allows you to be someone with fortitude, that is to say, someone who can stand up to the slings and arrows of this life that tells you not to be virtuous, which then leads into your ability to be temperate, which is to say, to reorganize all of these virtues in a way that they don't compete or trample each other. And then that brings you right back around to right reason, and it reorders the entire thing. But the point is, it's all based upon the idea that reality is what it is and you need to act in accord with it. Or to say, in a more blunt way, it is based upon objectivity. The idea that yes, there is right and there is wrong. Now you can argue all day about mitigating factors, about what happens that might take some of the blame off a person for doing something wrong. You can argue about intent, whether this person intended to do something wrong or not. You can argue about different characters. Is Wolverine this? Is Punisher that? But all of that is semantics. All of that is window dressing and part of the story for those older stories, that is dependent upon a definition of hero that comes from Western civilization, which runs straight through as a paragon of virtue. And you use your character and apply it to that standard in order to figure out how this character exists, how this story exists, etc., etc. Or to put it in a more grounded and simplistic way of looking at the entire thing, you look at a story and the actions of the hero within the story, and you say at the end of the day, even if it is subconscious in your mind, even if it is something that is ingrained through your reading of stories from Western civilization, you say, no, it all comes down to the free will of this individual, whether they choose good or evil. Sure, there are mitigating factors and all of that, but at the end of the day, what Western civilization teaches as part of its inheritance and culture, one of the fundamental principles is that you have free will, and at the end of the day, no matter what happens, you make a choice. And the defining factor between a hero and a villain is whether that person chooses good or chooses evil. But what do they portray here as the new type of hero? Because you got to remember, at the end, they're declaring that, yeah, she is a hero, but not a hero like Captain America, not like those old heroes. That's why at the first they say, we're not trying to turn her into a hero. That is to say, they're not trying to turn her into a traditional hero. They're trying to turn her into a hero, all right. The actress that plays her says, yes, she is a hero at the end. Why? Because she's a new type of hero. And what is that new type of hero? Well, it's a hero that operates in the gray area. A hero that has a balance, as they say over and over again, of good and evil within them. At the heart of this conversation is, would you do the same thing in that situation? Which is to say, there's no such thing as right and wrong. Don't take those standards and try to apply them here. You discuss what you would do in this situation, which breaks the entire thing down to what is known as situational ethics, which is to say that something can be labeled right and wrong simply by applying your situation to it. There's no absolute right or wrong in situational ethics. There's just, according to these various situations, how do you label this right or wrong? And we can see this play out with the very fact that, you see, they excuse the fact that she does these evil things. They excuse it by saying, well, it wasn't her choice. Well, she was led into doing this. Well, she was taught to do this by her father figure. You see, she has no free will. It's not about her choice, which you can then divide everything between right and wrong. No, it's just something that she was coerced into doing one way or another. It has nothing to do with her free will. It has to do with her situation. To the very extent that the person who plays this character says, yes, she wants to go kill people and get revenge, but it's because of her situation. Or the executive producer saying, sure, yeah, she struggles with doing anything good. She's bad for most of this entire thing, but that's kind of the point. Or the simple fact that at the end of the show, she goes and just wants to have Sunday dinner with her entire family, even though they quite clearly admit that she has not been redeemed at this point. Why? Because she doesn't need redemption. Why? Because it wasn't her fault. Why? Because it wasn't about her free will, her free choices. Why? Because everything's about situational ethics. Why? Because this is a new type of hero that doesn't base itself upon ideas, archaic ideas of black and white, right and wrong. It bases itself upon, well, you see, you're interacting with her family. Remember I talked about the Miss Marvel director also saying that this redefinition of superhero, well, you're drawn into it by these family elements. Well, the same thing works here. It's because you like her family that you'll forgive her for doing all of these things, and therefore she doesn't need redemption. And that comes at the end of the show. So what is supposed to make you feel for her, as they say in the article, it's about feeling with her. It's about empathizing with all of the decisions she has to make. How and why is that done? Well, it's done with the DEI stick. It's done with the insertion of intersectionality. Because why? Because she has all of these intersectionality markers. She's a woman. She's a Native American, which makes her a person of color. She's also disabled in a number of different ways. So you have all this cross-sectional intersectionality coming together within this character, and you have to give her a pass because of that and allow this conversation to take place about, well, maybe I'd do the same. Well, it's a gray area. Well, this is the new type of hero, which again is cemented in the family dynamics at the end, where she is forgiven even though she does not have any redemption or a redemption arc, or even is sorry for any of the things that she has done. So this is the new type of hero. It is a relativistic hero, a hero based upon relativism.
Does she save her family? Well, duh. Like, is this a bare minimum requirement for someone to be heroic? Like, every gangster is all about protecting family. But let's discuss this a little bit more, because this is a good evidence for some of the other thoughts I've been having on the progressive movement. The fact that saving your family is being used as a moral gauge is evidence of my larger thesis that woke progressivism is a resurgence of honor-shame culture dynamics in the traditionally innocent guilt West. So what am I talking about? If you look at pretty much anthropology all across the world, there are different types of cultures. The two main ones, really the most base one, is honor-shame. The idea of honor-shame is that really what makes you in good standing is not if you follow a bunch of rules, if you meet certain objective criteria, but rather if you do things that bring honor to your family, your tribe, your people, or maintain honor or restore honor, and if you avoid shame, if you bring shame to you, your family, your tribe, your nation, then you that is equivalent to breaking some sort of law. So your right standing, whether it's right or wrong, is based on the intricacies of honor and shame, which are all ultimately social ways of gauging your social acceptance. So if we think about the most Marxist or progressive society right now, such as, say, China, it's all honor shame right now. They have a social credit score. This is an honor shame cultural dynamic being pretty much commoditized in a way. So you cannot buy or sell things if you don't have a high enough social credit score. That's an honor shame system. In the West, and I think this is because of how multicultural the West has always been, you get these different cultures and subcultures that have their own sort of honor shame systems. In order to get them to all work together, we have to have, this is going back not just in America, but I mean the earliest times of Western civilization, the Roman Empire, had to transcend honor shame culture dynamics. So in order to get these different groups in a pluralistic society to work together, you had to have some absolute standards that everyone had to obey. And so your right standing is based on your innocence or guilt regarding the law. Okay? And so that helped form or basically become the standard by which you function in Western civilization. Honor shame still exists, even in Western civilization, but it's below the surface. What really helps you survive is if you are innocent of, we have our whole legal system is based on being innocent before being proven guilty. So you're presumed innocent. You could be unlikable, but still be innocent and therefore have rights. So you may be shameful and or shameless, but if you are still technically innocent based on the letter of the law, you have a right to own property and to succeed. Yeah, you don't have to be liked. You don't have to bring honor to your family or tribe in order to succeed in the West. But you don't see that in honor shame cultures. So what we're seeing with the wokeism is a destruction of the legal system and innocent guilt dynamics, and so that the underlying honor shame dynamics can emerge and that become the new standard. So when you look at all the BLM riots over the past several years, the Antifa, it's all honor shame. Literally, they'll yell shame, shame if you do or say something that the tribe deems inappropriate. I mean, this is what cancel culture is all about. You publicly shame someone to get them to conform to your standards. So, in an honor shame context, what really matters is whether or not you do good for your family or tribe. So, her protecting or saving her family, that's it's a given. Of course she's going to do that. To make that like a minimum requirement or sort of like satisfactory to determine that she's heroic in some sense, it just smacks of honor shame culture dynamics. So right and wrong is determined by what brings honor or shame to her family. Does she protect them? Yeah, then she's good. Universal objective morals are not nearly as important as what brings or maintains status. And this type of honor shame dynamic, this type of system is vulnerable to woke revolution. Another thing that stands out is that everything she does is therefore not her fault. There's no simple right or wrong. This leads to a relativistic ethics system. So going back to ABC, owned by Disney, going back about 10 years, My wife and I used to love watching Once Upon a Time, and I lost interest over time though because the messaging was so heavy-handed of secular humanism. This idea that everyone is basically good at their core, it's only society or upbringing that corrupts people, makes them bad. And so everyone's just all the villains, by the third season, pretty much all the villains had transformed into heroes. And not because they were redeemed, but because we learned that they have tragic backstories and they were just misunderstood. And so we have empathy for them. And so what do we see here at Echo? Is that empathy is the supreme moral value. Case in point, it's like, look at how she beats Kingpin by like overwhelming him with empathy and feeling sorry for him. And as RJ points out, in this relativistic ethics system, uh, actually, as the heads of Marvel and Disney point out, actually, it's not about her becoming a paragon of virtue, but rather that she finds or has a sense of balance within her. This is classic Eastern philosophy, yin-yang dynamics, not Western ethics and morality. Because the woke revolution has such contempt for Western civilization, because they view it as white and patriarchal, there's a fetishization of all cultures that are non-Western, whether it's Eastern mysticism, animism, or good old paganism. I mean, consider the prayers to ancestors that Black Lives Matter activists were doing during 2020's Summer of Love. I mean, just it's part of their practice in general now. Here's some evidence of that.
This is Dr. Abdullah. Listen.
When we say the names, right? So we speak their names, we say her name, say their names. We do that all the time, that you kind of invoke that spirit, and then those spirits actually become present with you, right? The first thing that we do when we hear of a murder is we come out, we pray, we pour libation, we build with the community where the person's life was stolen. And it took almost a year for me to realize that this movement is much more than a racial and social justice movement. At its core, it's a spiritual movement.
Oh, amen.
Because we're literally standing on spilled blood.
It should be glaringly obvious to you how in Echo they were using ancestor worship and promoting it, this very pagan idea. I mean, the entire finale was one of female empowerment via female ancestors inhabiting them. Not quite to the point of reincarnation, but they were empowered as females by their female ancestors. Quite literally to take down the big white man. And so with this relativistic ethics system that this show and modern feminism is promoting, or postmodern feminism, contemporary feminism, is promoting, it calls into question the definition of a hero. So I love how RJ, he talks about this all the time in his channel, that the traditional Western definition of hero is a paragon of virtue. And what are the virtues in Western civilization? Well, they start with right reason. I mean, if you've been paying attention, you know that the wokies, the progressives, hate reason. They actually view it as a white, as obviously something patriarchal and chauvinistic. The idea of reason being our foundation or anything, because they view that as a male trait. And right reason is based on being in accord with reality. Well, what are we seeing more and more these days? Denial, rejection, manipulation of reality, escape from reality. But when you have right reason, according to traditional Western philosophy and civilization, then you can have prudence. You can discern what is the right thing to do, what is the wise thing to do in each given situation. And then you can seek justice, justice being actually based on what is right, what is what is owed to each person based on their essence. And this requires making tough decisions and dealing with difficulties, and so that there's fortitude there, and then temperance, where you have self-control, self-mastery. So all of these virtues that Western civilization used to promote, which is Western civilization is a hybrid of Judeo-Christian values, primarily Christian. Of course, we have our Jewish roots, and Greek philosophy. But what that's led to is ultimately an understanding of objective morality. But the new postmodern feminist hero, well, that we're seeing here in the show Echo, is that the hero is just one who has a balance of good and evil, that yin-yang idea. And so how do we know what sort of values to promote with her? Well, it's just based on the situation. So we have situational ethics. There's no real absolute right or wrong. She's not a hero because she's a beacon of those values. No, she's a hero because of just the very fact that she's a victim of her upbringing, her trauma, her situation. So what we're seeing here is a weaponization of trauma and empathy. The viewer is manipulated to empathize with her simply because of her intersectionality and representation. Oh, she's a Native American hero? We don't have many Native American heroes. Oh, and she's deaf? And she's got a prosthetic leg? Wow. Yeah, every deaf child and can relate to it. Look at how much they're emphasizing that they're using ASL, which is really cool. I like that they did that. But that is not sufficient to make her a hero. She's the protagonist, but to me it's a Breaking Bad type protagonist. You actually should feel more morally conflicted about supporting and rooting for her. But they do a poor job of doing that. Because ultimately she wins without actually repenting and redeeming herself. She just doubles down on all of her bad decisions. So essentially, you're being told you should root for her because she's of several marginalized groups. And so that brings us to intersectionality. And for a good explanation of that, and how it's the bedrock of the woke revolution, here's a video from the Fuel Project doing an introductory video to the woke inversion. I really enjoyed the Fuel Project's content over the years, and so I really like the way he breaks down intersectionality and makes it very easy for people to understand. So,
in the video series before this one, called Trench, I set out to establish a Christian perspective on the culture war that has engulfed the world in the early decades of the 21st century. Through that series, we established that the political right, or conservatives, are primarily driven by these values, while the political left, or liberals, are primarily driven by these values, with love and compassion perhaps being the most important and the most central to their worldview. Now, since this is the case, liberals feel compelled to find the people who need these things the most, who need love and compassion and kindness the most. In other words, they want to identify the hurting in life, the downtrodden and the marginalized, so they may show them love and compassion and kindness, sympathize with them, champion their cause, and generally offer them support. And to this point, Christians can really have no argument. The Bible, after all, is filled with verses that encourage us to do this very thing. Isaiah says very clearly that we are to help the oppressed. The problem begins, however, with the framework that the left are currently using to identify the oppressed. It's called intersectional theory, or simply intersectionality for short. It was created in 1989 by an American civil rights advocate called Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, and it's defined in Wikipedia as an analytical framework for understanding how a person's various social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Intersectionality identifies multiple factors of advantage and disadvantage. So it's basically just a way of identifying those who are most disadvantaged in life so the left can offer them love, compassion, sympathy, and kindness. We can easily visualize the framework like this. According to this theory, Life is best understood as nothing more than a power struggle. There are some in the world who hold the power and who are advantaged by that power, and correspondingly, there are those who don't and who are disadvantaged by being powerless. Whether an individual has power or not is deemed to depend on identity traits like sex, sexuality, race, wealth, social class, religion, country of birth, and so forth. The more identities you can claim above the horizontal line, the more advantaged with power you're considered to be, for the reason that these tend to have more physical strength, money, or are part of a majority. The more identities you can claim below the horizontal line, the more disadvantaged you're considered to be, for the converse reasons that they tend to be physically weaker, poorer, or are part of a minority. So, for example, the theory says that a man has 1 point of privilege on the basis he is physically stronger than a woman. A white man has 2 points of privilege on the basis his skin color also makes him part of the majority in Western society. A white heterosexual man has 3 points of privilege on the basis heterosexuality is another majority orientation. Conversely, a woman is considered to have 1 point of disadvantage because she's physically weaker than a man. A black woman has 2 points of disadvantage because black skin is a minority shade in the West, and a black lesbian woman has 3 points of disadvantage because homosexuality is a minority sexual orientation. The left use this framework to identify minorities and those who they believe are the most marginalized and disadvantaged in life, and then they adjust their compassion levels according to how many oppression points they think you score. The more disadvantaged you are, the more deserving of love, compassion, sympathy, praise, and attention you are considered to be.
So what you have here is that the more points of disadvantage, the more worthy of empathy one is. And the more points of privilege, the more worthy of contempt and derision, and that you are viewed as an oppressor that must be overthrown or held out at bay, or you should be restricted in some ways. So ultimately, Marxism is all about revolution. That's why they don't promote equality of opportunity, but the pernicious idea or concept of equity, which they've redefined to be equality of outcome. And so that requires taking down certain groups in order to elevate others. And this is classic honor-shame culture dynamics, because honor-shame culture tends to view honor and shame, or particularly honor, as a finite resource. It's a zero-sum game. And so there's not an effort to increase opportunity for people, but rather they have what I want, so therefore I envy, I covet what they have. And the only way I can get it is not by me working hard and through merit obtaining that as well, but I must take it from them. I need to restrict their access, and then I can have it too. And so eventually what you're going to see, and what you are seeing in certain dynamics in this intersectionality matrix, is the dynamics being flipped. Where, I mean, look at LGBTQ, the thing I talk about most on my channel. It's almost like there's an 11th commandment that I didn't know about growing up. Thou shalt not offend the LGBTQ. The more marginalized you are depicted in our society, the more you're untouchable. You'll lose your job if you criticize certain groups. All right, so but yet it's because they're viewed as victims, but yet they have some of the most profound privilege that they're so protected. And so this is what intersectionality leads. It leads to more competition, more hatred and animosity between groups over really accidental and arbitrary distinctions, differences between people, or variety, really diversity. Diversity becomes not a strength, but an actual point of contention. Now, of course, they're not getting to that point yet in shows like Echo, where they're showing utter contempt for those who are on the upper side of that intersectionality matrix. But there's hints of it here and there. They drop in the different Marvel movies and shows these days, and just entertainment in general. Right now they're trying to do a more positive version by just promoting more and more of those that they view as marginalized. But pay attention. It's just a matter of time before the flip is going to script. They're going to go more on the offensive, not just the happy-go-lucky. Let's promote more of these traditionally marginalized groups or underrepresented groups. It's going to get to the point of vilification if you're not already seeing that. So, that's my argument. I'm sticking to it. Echo had some good things I liked, but had a lot that made me cringe. But it's important to actually pay attention to what messaging this is giving us and what influence it's going to have on particularly impressionable minds who are absorbing all this content. So I hope I gave you something to think about, and join the comment section. Hit that like button, subscribe, share. Until next time, please know that Jesus loves you freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully.